right, everyone, I think we're active.
Hello.
Hey. Well, I can see that they can see us.
That's the important part.
Welcome, everybody, to our after show for Dungeons & Dragons. This is called Footnotes. We're very happy that you've joined us. And first things first, I think we should talk a little bit about what the heck we're doing here. So this show is... it's kind of a mixture of a couple things. We want to be able to talk a little bit about the campaign, how it's been going, how these bozos are feeling about whatever I've been throwing at them. But we also want to kind of just talk about both Dungeons & Dragons and the tabletop community as a whole. Rules questions, feedback from the audience. We just generally want a place to talk about what's going on. You guys excited to get started?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. Well, I kind of think that the best place to start is just to talk a little about who we are. We didn't have a lot of a chance to do that on Friday for session 1. And for those of you who may be tuning in and haven't watched session 1, we're going to talk a little bit about that during this. So I guess spoiler warning for this channel. You can check that out right now on our Twitch under the VODs. And in the future, it'll be up on our YouTube page. First, Jake, you want to tell me a little bit about yourself, maybe your experience with tabletop, and just tell me a little bit about you.
I mean, I'm always happy to talk about myself. So, my name is Jake. I've been rolling with these two for a little over, I'd say about a year now. Something along those lines. It's been a hot second. But outside of that, I've been playing board games all my life. It was a small addiction as a child I didn't understand. As I got older and went into college, a lot of my friends played D&D. It was my roommates mostly, and there was just one drunken one-shot that kind of got me addicted to it all.
Oh, no.
My first class was a ranger. Let me just put it that way. I cannot tell you how to play a ranger today. They're fun.
You've played a ranger with me and in college. Just making sure I had that straight.
I don't remember either of them.
To be fair, I have very little memories of the rules of the first time I played D&D. Mm-hmm. Different reasons, but we'll get into that, I'm sure, at one point or another. Victoria, how long have you been doing, tell me a little bit about your experience in tabletop, both here and elsewhere.
So I was super against playing D&D, and then I wasn't. I was like, I'm not going to do it. No, I'm playing Magic the Gathering. I'm playing Warhammer 40K. I'm not going to play D&D. No, I've started playing D&D almost a little over 3 years ago now. We're getting pretty close.
Yeah. That first session, we're actually getting, I think we're almost to the 4-year point, but it's wibbly wobbly somewhere in there.
We started playing at Tribe Comics and Games, and I was a war cleric, a dwarven war cleric, and that kind of spun off everything for me. That Adventurers League character ended up being my first big campaign character's older sister, because I couldn't, your character dies, so you play their twin, that kind of thing. I can't leave this family alone, but I'm not going to play a cleric.
That first character ended up showing up in our campaign that the three of us actually recently completed together. Nora was actually pretty important in some of those last couple of arcs.
Yeah, Nora Hammerborn, then Finland Hammerborn after that for 3 years. Kind of hard to turn the bard off in that first session, I'd say, but 3 years of being the face and being the bard, I'm like, I'm gonna take one step back, still do magic stuff, but it's been good. Now I've DM'd a couple sessions, DM'd one Pathfinder session, and played a little bit of Pathfinder first edition, but I've been 3 years now, loving it ever since I started.
Yeah, I've seen. So I've run a couple of one shots, one really long campaign, and some other smaller stuff with Victoria specifically. And you've jumped into the face role really well, despite your out of game protest. But with Ismini, you're playing someone who's you're not charisma based for your primary mechanics. Your charisma is not negative, but you're playing someone who's a little more level, a little more average when it comes to that. What made you want to kind of shift out of that role, or what excites you about not being a dedicated face?
So for me, the biggest thing about shifting into a new character is I've been fiddling almost every weekend for 3 years, for almost 8-hour sessions almost every weekend for 3 years. So I wanted to take as much of a step away as I could while keeping, because I really enjoy playing spellcasters. I've discovered that, but I didn't want to be a face again because I was afraid I was going to replay Finland if I got too close to party face. So I'm like, I'm going to step back. Instead of doing things selfishly, I'm going to step into a more of a servant role, see if that like works with me, and explore different things. Because I think the most fun thing about playing the face for me was I was being so extroverted in session that it helped kind of translate into now I'm a little more extroverted in general with these people I've been playing with. So I wanted to step out of that and see how I could flex.
And I don't want to leave my dear man Jake out here. We've had one session with Silas, and we're going to get a little more in depth with these characters in just a bit. But Silas, and I really feel like most of the table over this last session got a chance to just show a little bit of that personality under there. And just here at the start, I'm not feeling. I think we might, to an extent, kind of step away from that party face mentality. We have multiple characters with positive charisma scores ranging from 1 to 2. We do, of course, for those of you who may have been paying attention to the stats there, we do, of course, have a 18 charisma sorcerer on the team. And while he is pretty talented at those sorts of skills, he's also been the least forthcoming with like information about himself. So there might be a little bit of we'll want to really divvy up that those social roles.
Yeah.
With Silas, you're going to do a lot of talking, but we saw him make some interesting social encounter decisions during session 1.
So good.
I would like to think that Silas is going to be an honest character. Sometimes honesty doesn't always flex with charisma. So, yeah. I like Silas to be a lawful character at the end of the day, and I probably took that a little too far. We'll see what happens.
Well, he's orderly. There's nothing wrong with lawful. There's nothing wrong with chaos. There is something wrong with lawful stupid. But we'll get to that. Probably not today. This session, let's. I guess I should explain my experience with.
Yeah, please do.
So, I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons with this group dedicatedly for the last 3 or so years. My first experience with the D&D like ecosystem goes back to growing up as a kid. My dad actually got me one of the early Advanced Dungeons and Dragons video games, Baldur's Gate, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Absolutely loved it. Maybe have included a reference or two in the campaigns I've run in the past and currently. But with that system, just growing up, I've had, branching out from there, I've had rule books for the systems for games I never got the chance to try, as well as like in college, we had someone in our college who had been running a 3.5 game for, I mean, he was in middle school when he started it. And so him and his friends still played it. And I was like, hey, you want to share a little bit? I want to learn a little bit about how to actually play. And the story does not end with me actually playing 3.5 successfully. We spent 2 or 3 weeks of our college free time building up this character, learning and iterating, teaching me all the rules. And my character sheet might have been like 8 pages long. I didn't realize at the time. My DM was having me make I think it was a 10th level character for my first exposure. And while I didn't get to actually ever play him, all of the excitement about learning the mechanics and talking about the story and talking with some of the other players who we were going to get to play with, it was really exciting. And I think that's the character creation aspect really pulled me into the game. But let's. I'm going to pull back because as a DM, we love to talk. We do it a little bit too much. And let's kind of just go over the last session. We're going to do it real quick, and I really want to hear about how they felt during the session, and let them yell at me or complain for my mistakes or my unfairness. This last session, we got to meet the party in the small town of Cuppersbeck at the edge of the Kingdom of Elts. You all sort of gathered together to start this initial quest given to you by the local steward and to begin investigating what was going on with the production of Wolfswill. traveling into the woods, you ran into your first encounter, which I have to say you guys did a fantastic job. Well, you didn't slay the enemies. You did win that encounter and then continue. And we sort of left off right as you discovered a bit of this corruption in the woods, this strange crystals and mud animated. How did it feel jumping into new shoes and just this brand new campaign?
I can say not going first and introducing our characters and kind of like watching other people start jumping in, and I was so nervous that entire time. That for me was, you guys were going and you were all in character and doing things, and I was so nervous. But I think getting into it, that first couple minutes of just being on new characters, we hadn't role-played as these characters ever.
Nope.
We just jumped right into it, and I'm really excited about it. I think it's different because you go from playing a 20th level character, fighting all these massive things, which I'm going to bring up later.
We should talk about that later, yeah.
But you go up from like 20th level, like, ooh, I'm going to, punch a god in the face, to I am now a second level wizard. I'm covered in mud, and I'm going to go hunt down a druid.
And you're babysitting, it seems like?
I'm kind of babysitting slightly.
I hope we can learn about that soon.
Maybe. We'll see. Unless, next session is a TPK. But
it's possible. I'm always looking forward to a TPK. It means someone's doing something right.
Please not yet. But it was fun. It was fun to get into. I think the second that you get to talk as that new character, it becomes like stepping into that new role, putting on that new hat is a lot easier once a couple words come out.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I'll be honest, I'm lucky. Amanda, who sits next to me, is actually like one of my favorite people. Every time we're in one of your campaigns, I feel like we're always playing a best friend.
That's true.
Yeah, and it's just, she brings out role-playing. She just makes everything super fun, super easy, and she is I'm not good at basketball, so I'm not going to get this reference right. When you throw it at the square thing and it bounces off, but in a good way, she's the good way.
This is a Dungeons and Dragons after show, and we are. Hey, if you got all of us in the same room, we'd have the combined knowledge of like 1.5 sports fans. Football. But it's actually funny that you bring up you and Amanda kind of pairing up, because when we played our last campaign, which was the Guardians, the last campaign we sort of bank shot. Thank you so much. Nope, not trying that.
I tried. He said no.
Hemak abla maswa. What? Not sure. But we were playing this campaign, our last major campaign, and we had this really solid group. Victoria and another wonderful player by the name of Jason had been there since session 1, and we're multiple years in, hundreds of hours worth of sessions, and it was quarantine when we started, right? Mm-hmm. And so we had shifted to Roll20, and I had asked both Jake and Amanda, two friends of mine, Jake through work, and Amanda was actually a close friend of another one of our players. And I just asked, hey, would you be willing to come in and play some Dungeons and Dragons? And I think we planned for 3 sessions originally, but the two of them just jived so well, coming in this pair of like old friends. They worked so well with the party that we went all the way.
We got adopted, is what he said.
You got adopted!
So for that, I knew Jake and Amanda separately, but my brain over quarantine has started going Jake and Amanda as like a unit.
Stand up, actually.
Yeah.
You two always arrived to our online sessions. You guys always arrived at the same time.
5 minutes early. If you're not early, you're late.
And it was adorable, though. Seeing you guys meet in person for the first time was the cutest thing ever, because you guys have been playing you started
over a year.
I think I asked her to take a shot with me, and it went downhill from there.
Yeah. But no, it is so much fun to see you guys to play these characters that are, because you started out as friends and then things happened in the last session and you end up wanting to
I think I
dissect her.
Oh, okay, that was a different character.
After
the
not
first
Silas.
one kind of died, didn't die.
Yeah, long story short, I got to see them play best friends in the beginning, and now I'm getting to see it again, but kind of It's just cute.
Well,
I just love it.
Let's actually talk a little bit about those campaigns. So we've got these kind of 2 campaigns we're going to talk about, and that's kind of the framework that we're coming from, bringing you our first campaign with Stories to D4. We ran that big 3-year campaign, which was called The Guardians of the Silver Dawn, and that campaign, Amanda and Jake played a sort of mentor and student sort of role, but it was the role itself. The mentor student dynamic had happened decades before the campaign, and so you came in both like these fully fledged, like coming out of retirement hero mentor pair, and you were a cleric and a paladin who had worked together to protect their kingdom. And now you guys are coming here as childhood friends. So though you guys are still friends, I think this dynamic is going to be completely different.
Oh, very much so. The best part about it is both of our characters are completely different people. It's a free game for us to be completely different PCs. So it's not just like our relationship's going to be different. Like, even outside of each other, I'm excited to be something that isn't this PC that we played for almost a year. So, honestly, yeah, it's going to be something I'm excited about. And really, I want to see kind of how not just our friendship grows, like, as these 2 new PCs, how we interact as, like, this, not couple, but, like, this pairing with 3 brand new people. Especially another pairing that seems a little eccentric. No offense.
Our pairing is
3
great.
people. 3 people. Huh. No, I was thinking, you and Amanda, your dynamic, is it possible that there's anything or anyone else included in that?
Oh yeah, we have to have some kind of a background. That's how you create a PC, like a background story. And with that, we had a 3rd party member for the longest time. He abandoned us.
Well, so this is actually kind of, my not so subtle segue into talking a little bit about session 0. Like what we brought to the table before our first session. And so we did our session 0 is a little disingenuous, as we met a few times, sometimes as a big group and sometimes individually, to talk about both the characters and our kind of expectations about the campaign, what we wanted and didn't want. And I kind of want to go through what we did to get to our start, and talk also about like, hey, how are one session in? Do you have any feelings about like expectations have been met? This campaign was originally pitched where our first campaign was this sprawling fantasy where you were teleporting between planes and traveling all over the continent, as something that at least at the start was going to be much more focused in a narrow area. So we have this kingdom of Elts is going like the big city that is on the horizon, essentially, just a couple sessions away maybe, being this big focus. And you kind of built characters tailored towards that initial pitch. The same way for Curse of Strahd, when Victoria ran that, we thought, okay, we're going to vampire hell. Where what kind of people would be interesting for that campaign? And just getting started, how are Silas? How are you feeling about Silas and his meanie?
I like being big. I'm just gonna say it. I don't really have to do anything other than be big, and I'm happy about that. I go from a spellcaster to large.
True.
Stick with that.
You've played a full caster, a half caster, and now there's just hammer.
I have not played a D&D character that doesn't cast a spell until Silas, and I mean, honestly, all I have to do is say hit. If I hit, it's nice. If I don't, I at least don't get.
And there's a lot, like, just because it's, yes, you're not using magic. I think at higher levels you are going to find there's a lot of options for you.
Oh yeah.
Especially based on some of those subclasses you talked about in the past.
Always something fun about a PC, about a character. So, like, even if I'm level 2 and all I can do is hit with a hammer, wait till level 3, because I'm going to hit with a hammer and then some. And that's what I want. Oh,
Yeah, and for me coming in and playing a wizard, I love spontaneous casters. I love saying, this is my entire spell sheet. I know all of these spells, and I can pull whatever I want to out of my pocket. And coming out of a campaign that had a wizard before, I kind of thought about it as there's all these different schools of magic, and the creation of Ismini was originally a Pathfinder character. So I was a specific sorcerer with a specific bloodline with this story, and I'd kind of combined 2 different thoughts that I had to create Ismini, kind of like this noblewoman, sorcerer idea that I had, like, never had to work to get her magical abilities. They're just innate, and I thought that was interesting. And then this, like, dark demonic bloodline kind of sorcerer, and they kind of coalesced and turned into, I'm a wizard, abjuration wizard, binding and sealing magic. And now I'm playing a wizard, but my first wizard idea that I've had forever was a necromancy. Like, I wanted to play a necromancer.
Oh, yeah, that was years ago when you first pitched her.
That was that was going to
No,
be...
not dark.
No.
Not dark at all.
No, she may show up eventually, but...
I don't like the sound of that.
Yeah, her name is Emmeline. And, she's just a necromancer. And it's great. And so...
Just a necromancer. As someone who usually plays clerics, I usually don't like that line. I'm just going to say it.
But I was going to play, as my backup character for Finland, was this necromancer. And so now I'm coming back to thinking about a wizard, but an abjuration wizard, so more about protective magics and less about let's raise armies of undead. So I'm excited about it.
You know, kind of speaking about other character concepts, I do actually have something from chat here that I just kind of want to run past you, just in case there's something that maybe this is going to be on the docket in case I decide to bump off either of your characters. We have here from Viper Mara, here to drop a character idea: a bard monk who is a bard, Bonk. But is Bonk indeed. Is a rapper based on Parappa the Rapper. He buffs his damage, but he raps what he's doing with punches and kicks.
I love it.
Bard subclass.
If there is a Valor Bard build, it is Parappa the Rapper.
So your build for Silas, I just want to share, is very similar to my ideal monk build. And I just want you to know that.
Constitution?
So we haven't...
So the Crusher feat, the Grappler feat, because your fists are blood. I love
You used
monks.
your Crusher feat on that wolf during our first session, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, look, you've got a new character. You've got to flex what you can do. I have 3 skills. Might as well use one of them.
Yeah, and I just cast cantrips the entire time.
Shaking your wrists or something?
Have you used a spell slot?
I used... Actually...
You cast one spell, Find Familiar.
I cast Find Familiar.
Or did you...
That's a ritual cast.
That?
Yeah, I ritual cast Find Familiar.
Yeah.
So, Squawk showed up.
And
Who
just...
named him Squawk?
Because this is the first time doing this session, or doing this show, Footnotes is going to be a place where if any of you guys have questions or comments or just kind of want to tell us off, this is the place to do it.
Yeah, we're going to have a conversation here with each other and with you guys if you've got stuff for us.
Yeah, we're here to chat, have a drink, and, just have a bit of fun. Parappa the Rapper is very good. Alice and Star Fox. That's fun. We had... Let's look. You mentioned mechanics, and we got we know coming up is your 3rd level subclass, because most other classes, every class in 5e gets a subclass by somewhere between 1st and 3rd level. I think. Let's see. I think everyone else has their subclass at this point, except for Silas.
What?
But this question actually applies for both of you. What sort of mechanics or abilities are you sort of looking forward to? You played in previous campaigns Cleric, and you've played an Artificer. You've played mainly a Bard. And so you're playing wildly different sort of character concepts now. What are you looking forward to in the future?
Yeah, well, I mean, do you want to start with that, or...
I can go. The Abjuration, the Defense Wizard, I love the Arcane Ward already. I'm obsessed. So I'm excited to just have the ability, because, I played a Bard that did a lot of damage. That was my thing as a Bard.
Yep.
I decided that I was going to forego towards the end of the campaign a lot of the crowd control stuff, and I was casting Fireball and just, being a nonsense person.
Murder and music.
Yeah, murder and music. So I wanted to go ahead and play like a defensive wizard. So I'm really excited for whenever the Abjuration Wizard gets to use the Arcane Ward to protect other people and take some of the damage. That I think is going to be fun because I really want to lean into that. I think the first thing I asked you about it was, can I cast shield on other people, please? I can't. I'm not allowed to. I cannot break the rules.
So,
but
we did talk about how we have some folks who are watching who are less familiar with Dungeons & Dragons. So let's talk about how ridiculous this ask is of my player.
I know,
it's my time to roast Victoria. Shield is a reaction spell, which means you can use it not just on your turn, but in response to a certain stimuli, in this case getting hit by an attack. Yes, I punch Jake and he can cast Shield. It adds 5 to your armor class. which determines how easily you are hit or struck by various attacks, like a sword swing, a bow, take an arrow flying through the air, or even a bolt of fire flying through the sky towards you. A high armor class, like a knight wearing full plate mail, has 18 armor class. Adding 5 to armor class is essentially donning a whole extra suit of armor atop whatever you have built into your character to begin with. And I love it. It's one of the most solid first level spells, and there's probably a topic for a future week is the idea of like must take spells and if that's good or bad for the game itself.
I have some arguments.
I don't like it, but we'll talk later.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's good for us to have that kind of note. Now, Ismini wants the ability to shield for other people, and not a thing you can do. Shield affects only yourself. It's kind of the limiting factor. Oh, we'll have you scooch in just a little bit, Victoria.
Yeah, I'm off.
Sorry. I think at least I put on
now,
deodorant.
that would be a really strong power for her. But I actually noticed she demonstrated one of the strongest powers that a D&D character can have.
Sex appeal?
Okay,
That's
flirting
the
with the town guard is useful.
Yeah.
But I'm actually referring to the fact that her dice are clearly rigged.
Okay, they're not.
She rolled 4 19s in session 1.
I do not have rigged dice because I had an initiative of 5. So they're not rigged. They're just good. They're good
I
dice.
think
It's a very convenient alibi.
That's not the case.
I just
No.
want to cover one thing, though. The first roll of the campaign, I'm pretty sure, was my own nat 1.
It was a nat 1. You set us off on the wrong foot.
Do you know what my first roll of the campaign was? It was the same thing as it was for my last one.
A natural 20. Your first attack of the campaign was a natural 20. You not
What?
2 times in a row. That's 2 campaigns.
Hey,
Dice are
so
loaded, not yours.
His dice are loaded.
I have my dice are pretty good. Now we've done like the little testing the weighting of the die. We've also done dice testing, but during sessions, man, they do roll very, very well. Chubis called it, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
By the way, you're the best. He's been super helpful in getting this up and started. Let's, man, you. Oh yes,
I do have
Victoria,
something.
please. No, you guys interrupt me away. I'm
Yeah.
not the DM. I'm just here. I'm just on the panel.
So I wanted
to say that.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about how the last campaign, to a degree, some things came up in the first session that kind of how the last campaign informed the current campaign.
Okay.
So number one that I wanted to talk about was the Elven Pantheon. That's one that I really think is important for people who are familiar with like the Forgotten Realms D&D setting.
Counter argument, the 9 as well.
Well, I will say this. One thing that this show isn't is so we'll talk a little bit about our
just
setting,
for clarification.
but no one will ever have to watch this to understand what's going in
Right.
our show. This is just an extra time for us to get together. So, like she said, there are these 2 big pantheons that are
When we're talking about how Coralon.
yeah. So there's these 2 main pantheons that are pretty important that encompass most of the area that our campaign has talked about. There is the Elven Pantheon, so it's a series of elven gods known as the Seldarine. There's another one known as the Nine. The Nine, we've got to learn a little bit about them as they've seen that little archway a dedicated sort of shrine to those gods. The Nine are actually the 9 oldest deities in our setting. And so it's a small collection of gods who are worshipped in specifically the area known as the Kingdom of Elts, as well as, like where Silas is from, the Vorax Empire. And as Victoria alluded to, the Seldarine had a leader named Coralon, the creator of the elves and the leader of the Pantheon. How's he doing?
He's a little bit dead.
How would you be a little bit dead?
Well, that's your fault.
It's okay.
Not mine.
I
It is
don't-
also his fault.
I don't want to blame us, but if we had to blame anybody,
Call us PC.
I was gonna say the DM.
Oh.
You're the one who killed the elven god.
Thousands of me tried to help.
Thousands
He's
of you
not
also
arguing.
did it.
Well-
Remember, you're every NPC. you're the shopkeepers and the lost child and the school teacher trying to get us.
Like
the
a magic
school-
weapon or
The Eric Cochran Bard.
Okay, listen.
Nope.
You're the person who comes to us and says the trolls are attacking the school children, and then you are also the trolls attacking the school children. Yes, that happened.
Wasn't it an orphanage?
No, it was a group of remember the
Yes,
Church of Two Dragons.
in
yeah.
on the Coin Rock Coast.
Right. What I'm saying is the DM is evil and killed the elven gods, so now the elves have a new head of that pantheon.
Yes.
And just, remembering that he has both killed off a quarter of elven kind on the continent we're currently in, and also the god of the elves, is important for me serving the house that he killed off.
Yes. So both Ismini and El they're northerners. They're not from where we're currently at in our campaign, but where you're from, you both worship the Seldarine. You both worship the elven gods, despite not being an elf yourself, or on the shelf. What kind of makes it fun is I'm really excited to get to see the 9 wasn't super important in our first campaign, and so there's this world building aspect that they sort of knew about beforehand that we're going to get to watch and kind of learn about as we go in the campaign. Some of the players are familiar, so Jake and I have talked a little bit about it during our session 0, as you're from a location that worships the 9.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's some expectation about you are aware of, hey, they work a little bit like this, and so you can use that information to your advantage.
Yeah, there was a moment in the session where Connor's PC did something disrespectful, and I intentionally asked if anyone else noticed, because there was a chance I would have tried to kill one of the player characters there.
Violent PvP in Dungeons and Dragons is not well balanced, and generally speaking isn't... Without work, doesn't work well. Now, as I'm hoping you guys are going to be seeing in the coming weeks, I have a few homebrew systems we've developed over the past few years that have helped for certain places that we find that 5e could be expanded upon. 5e is an amazing system. Wizards of the Coast has done a lot of work to help it account for so many different scenarios. And also, it's very expandable. The same way they've done with their actual books. We've done a couple little expansions of our own. Notably in this one, a sort of dueling system to resolve sort of one-on-one encounters without it coming out down to a very boring... rock, paper, scissors is not a terrible way to talk about a one-on-one encounter.
And that's party dependent too. Some parties, PvP isn't something that comes up, but we had a couple different scenarios where there were one-on-one fights, or
the Tournament of Blades.
The tournament that we went to where it was team fights and it broke off into one-on-one fights. So there were holes for our play that were noticed, and then systems were worked out from there. So it's going to be party and table dependent on what you notice, because I think that there's tables where PvP is probably more common, and
yeah, I've heard of that.
And especially we've had our own couple occasional instances of PvP that I've been the victim of. But calling you out, Connor.
Character, I think I shot you too.
Yeah, he shot me whenever he first met me as one of his characters.
You did?
Yeah.
What better way to say hello than trying to dismember someone?
And when we get Clella on the show, I'd love to bring up a little bit about this specifically, because we can talk a little bit about how table expectations can change from table to table. So always talk with the other players, talk with the...
Sorry.
Fear him. Player to player expectation, or table to table expectations can change. Talk with your dungeon master, talk with your fellow players. We had another player, Clella, who when she came here, the sort of culture we had cultivated here was different from where they had before with regards to loot. Now, that doesn't say anything about better or worse, but we get to see a very interesting shift in how the game is handled, how the game is run. And I think it's kind of a lot of fun. And I definitely hope that we one day, we get enough people watching and we're able to devote the time and energy towards it. I'd love to see other players trying things out. I know we've talked about potentially having other folks DMing one-shots or potential, other games, other systems even. Mm-hmm. I did have an actual question from a few questions here from viewers from session 1 that were sent in during the chat, or actually via DM over some of our social medias. If you don't mind if we move into those.
Go ahead.
So and it's kind of some of these questions I know the answer to, but I want to kind of talk to you guys about how you felt about these. And a lot of them were actually about character creation. Okay. And what was the process of, making these particular characters? How did we do our dice rolling, and also any special rules that we use in the process of generating this particular party?
I fell victim to the whims of dice. So we were allowed to roll, and we had like you add up the score and you see what your like overall. I don't know how the full math works.
So the full math for our system is we use a variation on one of these standard options, which is 4d6. So you roll 4 dice and you drop the lowest, and you do this for each ability score, which leads you to a score between 3 and 18, which is a reasonable boundary.
I think I had a 7, and then you give us 2 chances to roll. I got a 7 and then a 5 out of that. Like the overall total scores, like adding up all the modifiers and stuff. Like I think my highest stat was like a 12 out of 18 possible with the rolling.
Her original rolls were very rough, and how we do that is we determine, based upon those rolls, we determine the point buy costs of that equivalent roll. And unfortunately, both of her rolls were under a threshold I had set. And past that, you could use a sort of standard fixed array that we had established for the campaign. And every player had access to the fixed array. And the fixed array was great. It was above the average. So that there was a possibility for players to be very strong, but there wasn't a chance that anyone was going to have to be left behind. There was always a choice going into that.
Yeah. And so after that, it was, okay, I'm going to use a standard array. And I kind of went into it again, having built that character out in Pathfinder. And then talking to, just like getting general ideas of what people were doing. We all wanted to play Sorcerer.
There were...
I think 3 out of 4, or sorry, 3 out of 5.
We talked classes privately. And 4 of my players messaged me a list of... before we had our session 0, our earliest meeting about the campaign, I asked everyone, hey, just very short 1 or 2 sentences what you're thinking for a character concept, and maybe bring 3 classes that you have in mind. And 4 of my 5 players wrote Sorcerer in that list. Yep. And so it was interesting determining where we would end up. And I think Clella is actually the reason that we were able to resolve that, as Clella is playing a homebrew class that we worked on, and then everything else sort of fell. We figured out the pieces after that.
Yeah. After that happened, I realized that we talked about it, and we were like, okay, no, my character does work as a wizard. The concept is the same, really. So I sat there on the floor with all of the D&D books laid out in front of me, looking at all of the wizard subclass options, and just went through and said, okay, this one doesn't fit for my idea. This one, and I left 3 or 4 left, and then it came down to just drilling further into, okay, what is the purpose of, because I am playing a character from a house that was kind of established in our first campaign. We heard whispers about, we learned a little bit of information about, and so I was like, I really like that house, I want to follow, and can I do this later? And you said yes. And
so that's one option. Is there's sort of 2 ways you can build. Well, there's more than 2, but 2 main ways you can build a character is sort of mechanics first, or the essence, the spirit of what is the story. And for your character, you had this very clear idea of, I wanted to be a Callister, which has a meaning in our setting. And we worked together to go through a bunch of options and found what mechanical shell can you build around this idea. And I think you did that phenomenally.
My first character was definitely, I want to play a bard.
Yeah,
and then everything
you wanted to be a bard.
Around it came up later.
And Finlan Hammerborn, Bard Extraordinaire, is certainly a bard.
Yeah, I barded 1 through 20.
That doesn't sound right.
Go ahead.
We had... Okay.
I'm sorry.
Derail me.
Tell me about you. What was it like making Silas?
I'll be completely honest. It kind of ties into that story of everyone was like, I want to build a sorcerer. So a lot of times in this group, we almost always have kind of the same idea. Like one of our not one shots, but kind of side campaigns was an entire party of elves. We all came to you and were like, let's play elves.
We all came as elves.
We were all an elf, and he just let it happen.
Okay, it's his fault though.
I think what ended up happening is I had 4 players initially, and 3 of them asked privately before we got together as a group, was like, can I be had a concept and can I be an elf? And that last player had a couple races, and I just asked, and he was like, "Oh, you're considering an elf for one of your options?" And they're like, "Yeah, that sounds like something I might be interested in doing." And we show up to our session 0 with our character concepts in front of us and our pitch. So tell us more about your characters for Descent into Avernus. And I watched 4 people explain their elf-based characters.
Yeah. So we were the Helves.
Oh,
It was.
I miss them.
I miss the Helves so much.
It was seriously one of our best creations for a custom party.
It was a weird dynamic, and that's the thing that I like about this group is we had a moment in that campaign where the other players chose to do something that my character was fundamentally against. And in session and in character, I was so mad at them that my cleric cast create food and water and cast it in, and just cast it and was like, I have 3 bowls in front of me for these, or 5 bowls for these people that I like, and then everybody else you can eat off the floor because you made me mad.
You kicked the bucket or the barrel of food over and let them spoon oatmeal off the ground.
I will still argue that my character was mildly innocent in that.
But it was definitely, you were not.
He was not innocent.
You guys. But it was one of those moments where definitely, and this is a thing that can happen sometimes, I think, where the feelings and the emotions, if you're really getting into your character and really getting into the moment, I was in character so mad. Then after the session, I'm like, guys, I'm not mad at you as people. I'm not upset with you.
We had someone actually ask about that. There are points in our sessions where there's going to be confrontations between players. And something that we find really important here at Stories to D4, both in our home games and also going into the stream, that I want to make very clear, is that there can be fights in our universe. That conflict can be very interesting and entertaining. But when we leave here, when Connor spit on the archway...
Oh, I laughed. Personally.
Yeah, you and Con, we do check-ins during our break, during sessions. When everyone needs to go fill up a drink or go have go have a bit of coffee because they're nodding off, whatever it is, we also will check in with conflicts, make sure everyone's having a good time. Arguments in character and fights as people are wholly different here. Just because Jake pretty directly caused the death of someone in another campaign doesn't mean Victoria was mad at him as a person.
I didn't directly cause the death. I just chose not to resurrect them. There's a difference.
You chose not to resurrect an angel. I want everybody to have that very clear.
And we won't give you more context. That's all they're getting for this week.
That's all you get from the Helves. But I think that the most important thing when playing D&D, and it's hard whenever you go to a store, for example, and play D&D.
Sorry, it was my bad.
It was for sure your fault.
It was for sure your fault, but it's okay. But whenever you go to a store and you're playing D&D with strangers, I think that there's probably some concern going into those situations and playing through these preset where you may not know the DM, you may not even know anybody at the table, and maybe something happens that you feel like, and that comes down to that argument of my character would do this and how much of that is okay. And we have kind of this general atmosphere at our table of we're okay with my character would do certain things as long as it's outside of the game that we're all okay with each other is the most important thing to us. So I was piping mad at them, and I kept doing things as a character that was like, no, I'm not going to feed you guys for the full day, eat off the floor. But we were all fine with each other outside of it. And I can see how maybe if you're coming into the hobby and you're kind of worried about playing the game with other people.
Yeah, maybe not a great thing for your first session you ever play.
Right. But I think that having that communication open with your DM, or if you're DMing, keeping that line of communication open with your players. I was DMing Curse of Strahd, and in one of my sessions, I came very close to killing a player character that was a 16-year-old boy. And I think, I was wailing on a 16-year-old boy as a vampire. And that was another situation where...
the plot for Twilight? Or am I...
Stop. But I think it's another thing of, we had that session 0, wrapping back around to that, where I was like, hey, you're coming into a gothic horror campaign. You have a chance of death. Do you really want to do this? It's like, yeah, sure, okay, then we're going to go in. And there's ample opportunity throughout that entire module to kill your players if you're interested in it. But knowing ahead of time that's what you're getting into, I think, is the point of the session 0. D&D always has a chance of death. for characters, but the thematicness of the campaigns and kind of like what you're planning on doing is important to talk about.
I want to push back there and kind of and actually as part of pushing back on a D&D question, kind of lead into something else we have here.
Okay.
I will say this. Not all Dungeons & Dragons has the possibility of death.
Sure.
We've played before with Victoria's family, and there are cases in D&D, like when you're playing sometimes with new players, or sometimes players just want a beer and pretzel game and don't really want to work. They don't necessarily want that aspect. Or alternatively, there are people who will play with younger kids who maybe that's not right for their specific context. Good D&D isn't D&D that applies to the rules. Good Dungeons and Dragons, or tabletop in general, isn't what is the hardest or the most well designed. It is the kind of game that all of the players and the dungeon master are happy with the game itself.
And that's fair too, because I did run that adventuring camp for young adventurers, the Hand of Tyr adventuring camp, and there wasn't a chance of death in that. Everybody was playing a minor character.
I couldn't have died, like on the triathlon?
No. You were going to be fine in the triathlon because you were surrounded by camp counselors who were going to make sure students didn't die at the adventuring camp. So even me saying like there's a chance, yeah, I know. It's just child characters with trauma seems to be a theme sometimes. But
What kind of games are y'all playing?
I ran an adventuring camp.
Wait for session 2.
Yeah. But yeah, I say you did, stick my foot directly into my mouth because that campaign doesn't have the chance of death, and those kind of situations are pretty player and DM dependent.
So now that we've kind of talked about how the rules aren't everything,
Yeah.
let's make everything about the rules just for a little bit. And
Okay.
There's a very good chance we might piss off at least one person in chat for this. This is going to be a segment that I'm not sure I can do every week, but something that I think would be really fun to include every once in a while, which is just I love to read over the rule books in various editions of D&D, as well as I like to talk to other DMs and find out about rules questions that they've had that where a rule may be not obvious or is highly disputed. And so I'm going to ask you, Jake. I have a very simple question. Are you familiar with the spell Fireball and the spell Misty Step? You don't have to know the exact rules text, but you know those spells.
Yeah, the fireballs.
No, I understand.
Oh, wait, counterspell.
No,
Are we
no.
bringing 3
No,
spells into this?
fire spell, Fireball, and Misty Step.
Yeah, okay, so fireball I can pretty much tell you off the top of my head. It's 120-foot range. Boom.
But you know the spells.
Yeah.
Fireball is an action. You make a ball of fire that explodes. And Misty Step, you teleport a little bit as a bonus action.
Yeah.
Can you cast these spells in the same turn?
No.
Cool. You know the spell Counterspell?
Yes.
It's not so nice.
Yeah, it's rude. I don't like it. It's rude.
It's a good spell unless it's being used against you.
I never take it. I always have it taken against me though.
So one interesting edge case is that, so a lot of players are familiar with the rule that is often called you can't cast 2 spells in one turn.
Yeah.
And so that's why can't I cast Misty Step and Fireball? It's because, well, the rules say so.
Fair enough.
But a lot of tables tables that I have played at, and I've also made this mistake in the past, the question of Misty Step with Counterspell. Counterspell is a reaction, and not an action.
It's not during your turn. It's during another player's.
Well, so here, let me give you a fun little example. We're gonna go back and consider a pair of wizards. We have the red wizard and the blue wizard. Okay.
Blizzard and Rizzard.
I'm not doing that.
Okay, sorry.
Nope. No.
I thought it was fun.
So we have this blue wizard who's going to cast a fireball spell.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We've got this person who's casting a spell, and the way the counterspell works is as a reaction. So the other wizard is going to cast counterspell.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely fine. That would work. Now let's consider the held action. Holding an action is used to move what would be on your turn to some other trigger.
Mm-hmm.
We now have a blue wizard who's going to walk through a door. And so the red wizard, who's inside the room, says, I would like to hold Fireball until someone comes through the door.
How big is the room? Because he's about to kill everyone.
That's okay. I didn't ask how big the room was. I said I cast Fireball.
How many times have I done
Confidence.
that?
And so the red wizard holds his spell. The blue wizard misty steps into the room and is now, or opens the door and begins casting Misty Step.
Mm-hmm.
The red wizard's held action activates, beginning to cast the spell. We're currently in the blue wizard's turn, who's trying to cast, who was getting ready to cast Misty Step, but now that there's a reaction, it's interrupted. The blue wizard who's entered the room may cast Counterspell. You've seen this many times, haven't you, Jake? Someone casting Counterspell?
Casting Counterspell, yes.
Cool.
Walking into a room, it's a little different.
This is legal. So far, we've done nothing naughty. The blue wizard has walked into a room, seen someone begin to cast a spell, and on their own turn, used Counterspell. This is the fun part. Can the blue wizard now cast Misty Step? He's not used his action yet. He's got an action. He has a bonus action. Let's say he's used up his movement. The blue wizard, being scared there was an enemy nearby, wants to get out of there because he's a coward.
Personally, I'm going to say no, even though his reaction happened on his turn. That's why it would be a no. It still happened on his turn as a reaction to someone's held action.
So this is correct, and this is what's kind of...
That's correct.
This is right. And what's interesting is a lot of folks believe the rule so the issue with the 2 spells per turn thing isn't an exact explanation of the actual spell, because the alternative case is where it's a little bit weird. Mm-hmm. We're going to take that same wizard from before and say instead that the blue wizard's not cowardly. So the cowardly wizard can cast trying to cast Misty Step. That's not going to work. But what's fun is, let's say the blue wizard was not cowardly and decides, I'm going to cast Lightning Bolt on that red wizard instead. This wizard can use the spell. So you can cast Counterspell and Lightning Bolt, but you can't cast Counterspell and Misty Step. And the reason is the actual rule in the player's handbook isn't that you may not cast 2 leveled spells in the same turn, but is actually when you cast a bonus action spell on your turn, you can't cast any other spells, except for one exception.
Cantrips.
A cantrip with a casting time of 1 action.
Specifically 1 action.
Yeah.
And so this is the same reason you can have multiple. There's a couple different ways you can have multiple spells in a turn. Action Surge being the most readily available way to do this. So you could cast Fireball. You could even cast Fireball using Action Surge and Counterspell on the same turn, although you'd have a lot of 3rd level spell slots at that point.
All of them are gone
what
now.
are spell slots other than reasons to be used?
And I think it's really fun because I think this is a rule we actually got wrong several times in the past, and I've seen a lot of people debating this one in particular. Some comments about whether or not reactions make it no longer your turn when they happen. Mm-hmm. But in this case, we're talking about someone using their own reaction on their own turn.
Yeah, that makes sense. Though.
And I do quite enjoy playing with fiddly little rules.
That's a word.
Yeah. I think that the problem with it is, again, how we shorten it to you can't cast 2 leveled spells in the same turn.
And it's right 9 times out of 10.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just in these weird edge cases where you have reactions, which our last party had 2 people with Counterspell, 3 people by the end.
Oh, yeah.
So we had this situation where a lot of people could Counterspell at the same time, which, again, coming down to reactions, how do you order to, like, the player reactions? When you decide who, is it my turn to say that I cast Counterspell? We're not going to sit there at the table. It's supposed to happen in a split second and say, like, who's casting this time? Which player is doing what?
And I think we had 3 at one time, 3 counterspells in one
The
single
highest counterspell chain we ever had was 5. That was involving, of course, enemy NPCs.
Yeah.
But if we get to 6 this campaign, I will go gray by the end of it.
Well, I don't know if we can.
Well, let's consider the fact that there are 3 people in this party. 4 people. Actually, do artificers have access to Counterspell? They do not. So only 3 of our players will ever have access to that spell.
If I somehow went Arcane Knight, I don't know the spell slots. I don't know the spell list.
Eldritch Knight does have
Eldritch Knight,
access to
because that was how
That's what
Kevril,
Connor got.
yeah.
Kevril.
And we did have one other fan question. We had one other question from the
Question
from the
from the
Discord.
chat.
Just question from the chat from last time. How are you all going to deal with the monster at the end of the last session? The strange, muddy, crystalline, elemental-esque thing that has emerged from the stream.
Good question.
In some combination of these two, and I'm not sure of the order.
Oh, that's a good point. There has been a suggestion from Tubus to kill it.
Right, but before just killing
Easier
it,
said than done.
yeah, I want to study it and hit it, and I cannot promise you what order those two things will happen in.
Let's just make sure it doesn't kill the front line while you're studying it. As the front line, I feel like I can say that.
Front line. You mean L?
Who?
Lelier?
Oh, we
Talking about the main
did have
character?
some confusion about that. We have two main frontline characters. We of course have Silas, big man on campus, big old shield. Well, appropriately sized shield, as we determined. Lots of natural armor, but we also do have a magus. The magus, for those of you who may not have played in the Galarian setting or with any of Paizo's work with Pathfinder, is a mixed melee and magic character, sort of the Spellblade kind of archetype. You could compare them in a way to the Paladin in that they are a mixture of, rather than a Paladin being sort of like a cleric and a fighter, being more like a wizard and a fighter. And where the Eldritch Knight is durable and focused on abjuration, the Magus is often much more focused on speed and leans a little more magic heavy than that.
I had a question.
Ooh!
Something that we haven't talked about yet. So what'd you have to drink?
Ooh! Today we had just a bit o' scotch. Why do you ask?
Jake?
Oh, are we sharing our booze?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were drinking drinks on stream. We should probably talk about what they were.
That's kind of fair. And that's something I introduced you to, so it's a special place in my heart.
Yes, this was this was what you brought for our first session.
Yeah, I used to work in a bar, so I have very, very small skills, but at least enough to, like, make an alcohol. This is one of my favorites.
Make a beverage.
That.
You're on Twitch.
Make a beverage. With that said...
Thing?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Oh, whatever. That said, one of my favorite things to drink is mezcal. For some reason, I have never liked tequila, but for some reason, mezcal is perfect to me.
So what was this called?
I'd rather not say. It's a Naked and Famous.
Thank you, Jake.
Dear God.
So yeah, that's what I had.
Well, now I feel vague because we actually explained this. I was so confused. This is the Balvenie, which is a Scotch I'm a very big fan of, and it's the double barrel if you are Scotch drinkers. It's a lot of fun.
Question number 2 for the DM.
Oh no,
Yeah.
I plead the fifth.
So we've talked a little bit about how us as players have gone from playing 20th level characters to 2nd level characters. What about you with world building? Because you've gone from building these massive scenarios where we're fighting gods and we're
Outer space or something?
You were in space.
We were in space. We're trying to save the continent and like reality and all sorts of nonsense. Down to we're gonna go out into the woods to try to find a druid.
And now we're fighting mud.
How does that feel? Like, what was your process, or how do you feel about going from these massive adventures back down to that smaller scale?
Running a 20th level encounter, you will take for a normal encounter, so not something that's a big final cataclysmic boss. This just an average 20th level encounter still takes a considerable amount of design work. We had, by the end of our last campaign, my homebrewery account had over 350 unique NPCs that were developed. A lot of them were similar, so I'd have things that were essentially, if we had an organization that was different levels of assassin, I'd have similar stat blocks for the different tiers. But I had to do a lot of things, as you were not only 20th level, but your characters had artifacts, legendary items, the backing of multiple NPCs who were incredibly powerful, and so there was a lot of custom work. What you faced against last time, we actually used the standard wolf stat block. Now, I do change, the only minor change I use a lot of the times with the monsters presented in the monster manual are great, but what I'll often adjust is I will use the maximum hit HP for the hit die that are recommended. So if a monster had 1d8 plus 1, that would be written in the PHB as 6 HP, but I would instead assume, rather than average, a maximum of 9 HP. And so you fought a few wolves with a little bit more health than one would typically expect. I believe they have 18 if you do it that way. But the druid itself, that was actually taken from our campaign 1 for a previous NPC we had of a similar role. And when making encounters now, I get to think much more about low-level bits of environment. You haven't gotten to see it yet, but there's a place you might be seeing in the next session or so that I've got to play a lot with the environment, having not just difficult terrain, but places for cover, ways that sound can attract enemies, and ways you can influence the terrain. At 20th level, we had multiple party members who could teleport across the plains, who could evaporate a noble person's house and turn it into mud.
I didn't read the spell right. I'm just going to start by saying that.
We know. And otherwise perform these massive feats. One of our last encounters in Campaign 1, you took on a war camp which had roughly 3,000 soldiers there, including knights, monsters, and just a hell of a lot of low-level troops. And Earthquake is a very good spell.
And Tsunami.
And Tsunami.
And Tsunami 2 times in a row. That was that was a big encounter.
You let a wizard get to level 20.
Well,
you did let a wizard get to level 20.
I will say, to really answer your question, the biggest difference is that at 20th level, you were thinking, what kind of things do I need? I don't like being adversarial. The goal is never to beat the players. So at 20th level, you have to think, they're so powerful. How can I make this an exciting encounter? How can I make this dramatic? How can this encounter influence what they care about in a way that matters? Killing off one thing isn't super useful when your characters can, at will, bring people back from the dead. Though we never got to freely bringing people back was difficult even at the end game. Mm-hmm. So instead, at high level, you think about, what are the stakes? Well, if the party doesn't win quickly, the city might be destroyed. They may have survived, but how many innocents were hurt during the course of the battle? At low level, we can have a lot more personal encounters. This was a singular druid got to judge your character by how you reacted to these, I think, CR 1/4 wolves. Mm-hmm. And, maybe sparing them you passed a test. We'll have to wait and see for next Friday at 7 Central.
So I had one other question, kind of a DM. I've DM'd a little bit.
Ooh.
And so my question,
really,
DM to DM.
Really good.
I did Curse of Strahd, right? Mm-hmm. And we did one session so far of the we'll get into
delicious.
We'll get into the Goblin Barbecue. But I did one session of Carrion Crown, and they're I won't say they're similar, but they're both gothic horror themed and
dark.
And to a degree, I think of them very similar to your big bads from the previous campaign. Because the big bads in those campaigns are very clearly written out to be paying attention to the PCs and working against them by recognizing what they're good at and what they're not good at.
Are you going to try to figure out who the bad guy is?
Oh, no. That's not yet. Give me 3 more days.
Because those are secrets.
But my thing was,
secrets for a while.
How do you personally, because again, we were fighting against the same large organization of bad for so long, when building encounters, do you, in certain situations, think about what your players are good at or what they would be bad against fighting?
So, I said you don't counter your players, because we're on the same side. Our goal is to tell an interesting story. Even without an audience, your goal as a dungeon master is to make sure that you and the players tell a story that's fun. You all had a great time at the end. Even if it's sad, even if, you have your 5 closest friends crying around a table looking at a backpack or a diary.
Okay, listen.
You want to tell an interesting story. And so it's bad to counter the players thinking, how do I get them? But there are points where you will utilize in-universe reasons to go, how would a smart villain handle them? To take an example, to take an example, we could have a group in our previous campaign known as Chimera, who were these 3 talented crime lords, each running their own separate criminal organization, but working together when they needed to. Yi was one of them.
Yi was one of them. So you
And-
gave me one.
And so they actually had one of their people was studying the party, and so the party was making perception checks, and they weren't quite catching him. And it was like, don't worry about it. We'll talk about it another time.
The secret DM rolls where you hear the die hit the table and you don't know what it's for. Terrifying.
I do not
Fair.
fake. I take notes. You take these. The study that's happening in universe, and you can apply that. Now at low levels, there's not much of a need right now. Like if let's pretend, because this is not the case. But if I wanted to have someone who's studying you to come after you, you guys don't matter enough for this to be the case yet.
Right.
But if they did, they kind of could do a very surface level looking at you as, okay, we've got a couple people who don't look like they're very well equipped for close up combat. We can go fight them. There are ways to design encounters to directly engage with the threats, like with their talents, and those are really fun. And if you are a DM and you ever want to really have a great time with your party, there's 2 sorts of general ideas that I think are very fun if you use them sparingly. There is using a sort of analog a team that is an analog to your party. So if you have a party that's made of a certain set of classes, having enemies that are either thematically similar or diametrically opposed. If you have a paladin, maybe you have another knight or a cleric or someone who is perhaps a blackguard or anti-paladin. If you have a ranger, maybe you have someone who's from the forest or someone who's very much against nature getting into those places. And so putting those kind of opposites gives this kind of really interesting motivation. And it works really well with my other thing that I think is very fun. Split your party. It's not it can be hard, and it's not. I wouldn't recommend it if you're brand new. But breaking a party up into pieces and having them engage with different groups. Sometimes the ones that don't match are really interesting together, and sometimes having them fight their cohort is a very fun way. Having the magic user duel against your biggest fighter might not go well. Those fights get really hard to balance. But when you have the bardic duel happening flying above the skies of a castle, it's very climactic, it's very cinematic, and it almost always, in my experience, has led to players talking about it a couple years later on the show that we start together.
Yeah, that fight, because it is a real fight that happened, and it was 2 years ago-ish. I will keep talking about that fight forever, because it was...
Did you see Gio's comment?
I don't even know who Gio is.
Oh, that's not a secret. Gio is actually our crew here at Stories to D4. He has been very kind as to run our stream. We don't have him tonight, but during our actual sessions.
Don't tell me what to do.
During our actual sessions, he's been helping with audio balancing and keeping all the scene switching, so we really do appreciate what he's got going on here. Oh, now it's less serious. He is right. But I apologize, Victoria. I interrupted you.
Oh, no. I was just kind of curious about that interaction, because my approach has been, because of the campaigns I'm playing, is I've got everybody's character sheets. I know what they can do, but it's what are they doing in session? So I had some spells on my spell sheet, even as a spontaneous caster, that I used so infrequently that they almost didn't count as spells that I knew, because it just was like, I'm not going to use that spell slot to cast that spell. And if I'm casting that spell, I'm somewhere safe, not in combat, because it takes 10 minutes or whatever it is. So it was more about what the players were doing in session and who they were fighting against to know what their abilities were.
I want to add to that. And this is a little bit of a different thing. If I remember correctly, when you DM, you have an info card with the player's basic information.
Yeah.
I only look at my players' character sheets when we're updating them, and at the start of the campaign.
Right.
So when I'm designing encounters, I don't want to look up, and it's not invalid not to. I don't look at someone's AC, or if I'm running an encounter, I don't check someone's spell list, generally speaking, because I want to kind of get into that mindset of, well, what do they know? I'll go to my session notes and look at, oh, last time we fought, we got dominated by a fireball spell. So maybe next time they're going to kidnap a local armor smith and have him forge protective enchantments on their armor to have fire resistance the next time you come at them. Have them sort of learn, and only if it's within their means. But I really try to avoid... I want to know what they did, not what they have the capabilities of doing.
Thematically, I think that's where the difference is, because the most important thing I keep track of for my players while running those two different things was the passive perception.
Yep.
Because I don't want to be stopping a session and asking you what your passive perception is. I'm rolling because people are sneaking up on you. I'm rolling to see maybe, or just in general, who has the highest passive perception to notice the weird thing in the corner that nobody else notices. So whenever you're running a thematic campaign, there may be reasons to keep track of things like that. For me, it was less about I didn't care how much health you had or what your AC necessarily was, although it was easier for me to have that information. So
it's
speed up combat. But, because I can't remember anything. I couldn't remember people's ACs. But the passive perception in the Gothic horror campaigns was great just because, you have the highest passive perception? All right, you notice the creepy doll with its head spinning in the center of that glade in the forest, like just the weird stuff that you get to do. So little different there, because the nicest thing I ran was the children's adventuring camp. Everything else has been Gothic horror.
Yeah, you definitely do a lot more of a horror sort of thing. I've been a big fan of high fantasy.
Your campaigns. I'm scared easy.
Well, one last little thing to kind of go off of that. If you are a DM who is comfortable with or enjoys memorization, one thing I find it helps me a lot is I like to study the stat blocks beforehand so I can have a little bit less stuff on my table before me. Or Victoria actually has, Victoria's more of she'll have her computer up with all of her stat blocks. And so whatever you can do to have a system where you can readily have access to what your baddies can do, it's highly recommended. Yeah. We've kind of, just letting you guys know, it is now just past 8. Do we have any kind of last closing things? Jake?
I've had a question for Victoria.
Okay.
Ooh.
All right, let's go.
And this is my last thing. I don't believe in putting bad juju into the air, but you said total party kill first. So I gotta ask, do you have a backup PC already?
And is it Parappa the Rappa?
Can it be Parappa the Rappa?
No. See, here's the thing: is I came up with a backup PC.
Is it Bard?
Here's the problem, right? Here's the problem with me. I came up with a backup PC relatively, and I even talked to you about it in that where I said, I want to play the new Van Richten Bard. But instead, what happened to me, because this is my problem, is I've subsumed into his meanie my ideas for that, some of my ideas for that character that you haven't gotten to see yet. You did, but you don't. Yeah. But I've got to pull in my ideas around that character. Right now, I could throw a dart at about 3 different classes, but that's about all that I have. I don't have a personality because I'm superstitious. I'm superstitious. I'm terrified if I actually build out a full backup character, roll stats, give a name, come up with a backstory that my character's going to die that session. Finland never died. No backup character. Okay, Finland, while I was controlling her, didn't die, so anything that happens now is a DM's fault. See how that works?
Aggressive.
Okay.
No. Do you have a backup character?
This is mostly Matt's talked on it. Character creation is the most fun thing about D&D to me for some reason. So I probably have like 3 ideas. 2 of them are actually fleshed out, and I have not talked to Matt about them. So we'll see what happens. Don't kill my PCs.
I mean, those Hero Forge models take a while to get here. If you die, you might be playing a really pretty die.
We can just use a regular old unpainted.
I will
absolutely.
I was going to say, you'll be seeing, hopefully in the coming weeks, you'll be seeing, we've got a lot of really fun terrain we're looking forward to showing you guys. And I'm a big fan of painting miniatures, so you're going to be seeing some really fun bits of plastic painted up in all sorts of shiny colors.
Sounds like my mom's old book club.
Our book club.
We used to have a book club, and then
We
you stopped
need
talking
to read
me.
the book.
Now that we're off topic, I think this is where we're going to sign off tonight for our first session, chapter, our first footnotes. And we're really glad for all of you guys who stopped by. We really appreciate it.
These are the footnotes at the end of chapter 1, which just happened on Friday.
Quick question.
Can I tell them what we're gonna make for a logo eventually? Is that allowed?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
We want to eventually make a little logo with a foot stepping on a D4 to go with it for our footnotes. There's been some bickering about whether or not we can have a foot in a logo.
It's got to have a boot on.
It's not gonna have a boot.
No, not gonna be just a foot. Yep.
I mean, I'm mostly just curious if you have more than one footnote, is it now feet notes?
It's footnotes. Go ahead.
Victoria, do you want to trade spots?
All right. Thank you so much, and we'll see you this Friday at 7 for session 2 of Stories to D4.
Bye, guys.
I'm melting my drink.
I know. Oh, that was loud.